From impeachments to inaugurations, if it's a political story, we are on the scene. The race for the White House is heating up.
We're beating Biden.
How dare he say that?
If it's breaking news, we're live with the latest coverage. From the White House, the State Department, and Capitol Hill, we know the issues, but above all, we know the players to bring you the latest in-depth analysis on all the key stories that we're covering. I'm Eric Ham. Join me from Washington here on Firstpost America. Hello and welcome to Firstpost America, your global pit stop for the latest news from the United States and around the world. I'm Eric Ham coming to you from the nation's capital in Washington, D.C. We'll get you a roundup of all the top stories of the day, but first, let's take a look at the headlines. The Kremlin rejects Ukraine's claims that the Russian troops fighting on the front lines were using Starlink terminals. Kiev accuses Moscow of smuggling in the terminals. The Netherlands will stop delivering parts of F-35 jets used by Israel in the Gaza Strip after a Dutch court upheld an appeal by human rights organizations. Qatar frees 8 former Indian Navy personnel it had previously arrested and sentenced to death. They were accused of being Israeli spies. And heavy rain hits parts of the United Arab Emirates, leaving roads in Dubai flooded and traffic stalled. Authorities have asked residents to stay away from the beaches. And in some sad news, marathon world record holder Kelvin Kipton was killed in a car crash. Tributes are now pouring in for the 24-year-old Kenyan running sensation. But we begin with the latest here in the United States, where former President Donald Trump is once again courting controversy, this time over remarks made regarding NATO allies. Donald Trump suggested that the U.S. would not protect NATO allies who are not spending enough on defense from a potential Russian invasion. Trump made these comments at a rally in South Carolina recounting a meeting with NATO leaders. The frontrunner for the Republican presidential nomination said during his time in office, he told NATO members he would encourage Russia to attack any NATO member that failed to meet the alliance's defense target of 2% of their GDP. Here he is speaking to the audience.
The Secretary General Stoltenberg, well, I don't know if he is anymore, but he was my biggest fan. He said all these presidents came in, they'd make a speech, they'd leave, and that was it. And they all owed money, and they wouldn't pay it. I came in, I made a speech, and I said, you got to pay up. They asked me that question. One of the presidents of a big country stood up and said, well, sir, if we don't pay and we're attacked by Russia, will you protect us? I said, you didn't pay? You're delinquent? He said, yes, let's say that happened. No, I would not protect you. In fact, I would encourage them to do whatever the hell they want. You got to pay. You got to pay your bills. And the money came flowing in.
Now, these comments by Donald Trump has drawn criticism both at home and abroad, casting doubts over America's commitment to the defense treaty should Trump retake the White House. President Joe Biden slammed Trump's comments, calling them appalling and dangerous. Biden warned that Trump intends to give Russia's Putin a green light for more war and violence. In a statement, Biden said America's leadership on the world stage and support for our allies is critical to keeping the American people safe here at home. NATO chief Jens Stoltenberg warned that any suggestion that allies will not defend each other undermines all of our security, including that of the United States. The European Union has also denounced Trump's comments as reckless, saying they can serve only Putin's interests. Poland's defense minister also weighed in, saying that no election campaign is an excuse for playing with the security of the alliance. Article 5 of the NATO treaty says an armed attack against alliance members will be considered an attack against them all, triggering collective self-defense. All 31 members of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization have agreed to a target defense spending of at least 2% of each country's gross domestic product. However, estimates have shown only 11 member nations are spending that much. Now, staying in the United States, U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin has been hospitalized once again. The Pentagon is saying he is being treated for an emergent bladder issue. The U.S. Defense Secretary transferred his duties to his deputy, Kathleen Hicks. The Pentagon added that the White House, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and Congress have all been notified. Secretary Austin was taken to Walter Reed Medical Center and has been moved to the critical care unit for close monitoring. The Pentagon said at this time it is not clear how long Secretary Austin will remain hospitalized. A statement of Secretary Austin's being hospitalized was released within 3 hours, unlike last month when the Pentagon chief was criticized for failing to disclose hospitalizations in December and January. Secretary Austin was diagnosed with cancer, and on December 22nd, he also underwent a procedure to treat the cancer, which required general anesthesia and an overnight stay at Walter Reed. His initial diagnosis and treatment were not disclosed to the White House, which triggered questions of transparency and caused an uproar with lawmakers. Some prominent Republicans, including former U.S. President Donald Trump, called for Austin to be removed from his job. However, Biden has said he has confidence in Austin despite agreeing that it was a lapse in judgment. Later, Secretary Austin apologized during a television news briefing and acknowledged failures in notifying the administration and the public.
We did not handle this right, and I did not handle this right. I should have told the president about my cancer diagnosis. I should have also told my team and the American public. And I take full responsibility. I apologize to my teammates and to the American people. Now, I want to make it very clear that there were no gaps in authorities and no risk to the department's command and control. At every moment, either I or the Deputy Secretary was in full charge. And we've already put in place some new procedures to make sure that any lapses in notification don't happen.
Now, last week, the Office of the Secretary of Defense completed a 30-day review of the notification procedures around the transfer of responsibilities. Secretary Austin is scheduled to testify before Congress on February 29th about this very situation. Secretary Austin is a four-star general who led America's forces in Iraq. And now moving to the Middle East, where Israel is preparing for a major ground offensive in Rafah. The city that lies along the border with Egypt is housing at least 1.3 million Palestinians who have sought refuge from fighting in the north. It has remained the last refuge for Palestinians fleeing the Israeli offensive. Israel's military launched heavy airstrikes in Rafah overnight. The Hamas Health Ministry says at least 100 people, including children, were killed in the pre-dawn strikes. Hamas has warned Israel that a ground offensive in Rafah could torpedo hostage talks and imperil future hostage releases. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu earlier asked troops to prepare to enter Rafah. On Sunday, U.S. President Joe Biden spoke with Benjamin Netanyahu. The White House said that during the phone call, Biden stated the Gaza advance should not go ahead in the absence of a credible plan to ensure the safety of people sheltering there. Meanwhile, President Biden is also hosting Jordan's King Abdullah in Washington. The two leaders will be discussing the ongoing efforts to free hostages held in Gaza. Now, this is the first meeting between the two leaders since 3 American troops were killed last month in a drone strike at a U.S. base in Jordan. This comes as Israeli security forces say they rescued 2 hostages who were being held in Rafah by Hamas. The operation began with a wave of attacks in Rafah, and local officials say the bombing caused widespread panic as some feared Israel had begun its ground offensive into the city. Israeli planes, tanks, and ships took part in the strikes. 60-year-old Fernando Simon Marman and 70-year-old Louise Har were rescued by Israeli forces. They were both among the 240 people captured by Hamas on October 7th last year.
To see them joining with their families, with their loved one, for months I haven't seen them. Remember, there's a 70-year-old person there and a 60-year-old person. They are not young. These are the people who were kidnapped from Israel. Today, and kids who are still hostages at Gaza Strip. We are hoping, we are praying, and we want everyone to return to their homeland, to Israel. These people did nothing. They are purely civilians, and they are here, they were kidnapped. So now we are very happy to see them return to us.
The mission has been one of the few examples of a successful hostage rescue in Gaza since the start of the war. In December of last year, Israeli troops killed 3 hostages, mistaking their cries for help as a ruse by Hamas fighters to draw them into an ambush. Israel's army later apologized but absolved the soldiers of any wrongdoing. About 100 hostages over the 240 were released during a week-long ceasefire last year. In fact, last week, Israeli intelligence officers concluded that at least 30 of the remaining hostages have died since the start of the war. Families of the hostages have been pressing Netanyahu government to prioritize negotiations for their release. There have been mounting protests and even calls for early elections, with relatives of hostages frustrated over the pace of the rescue. However, last week, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu rejected Hamas' latest proposal for a pause in the fighting that would allow for more hostages being released. Now, staying with the Middle East, as tensions simmer in the region, Iran has launched a renewed campaign against Israel with a grand display of Iranian military might, including ballistic missiles and drones, at a ceremony marking the 1979 Islamic Revolution. Iranian President Raisi called for Israel's expulsion from the United Nations for genocide in Gaza. Here's more details.
While tensions in the Middle East soar, Iran marked 45 years since its 1979 Islamic Revolution, with a display of its military might and a campaign against arch-foe Israel. Leading this campaign was Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi, who called for Israel's expulsion from the United Nations over the Gaza war. He accused the Zionist entity of committing genocide in Gaza with the support of the US and other Western allies. In his speech to thousands at Azadi Square in western Tehran, Raisi demanded that bombing of Gaza should be stopped as soon as possible.
The way to eliminate the Zionist regime or to deter it from committing crime is cutting all economic relations and transactions with this regime. Bombardments against the oppressed people of Gaza must be stopped as soon as possible. Be aware, and the whole world should be aware, that the Zionist regime is ephemeral. They are just trying to buy time. The day has come for the death of the Zionist regime.
Since Iran's 1979 revolution, the Shiite Muslim power has had a deeply hostile relationship with Israel, the US, and Britain. Iran has also been under crippling US sanctions since Washington's 2018 withdrawal from a landmark deal, which granted it sanction relief in return for curbs on its nuclear program. Since the war in Gaza last year, tensions have spiraled further. Iran has been the biggest support for Hamas's war against Israel. Tehran hailed Hamas's October 7th attack as a success, but denied any direct involvement. Thousands of Iranians marched through the streets and squares, decorated with flags and banners with revolutionary and religious slogans. Support for the Palestinian cause and harsh criticism of the US and Israel dominated the ceremonies.
Our dream is to snatch the collar of Israel and knock it down in a way that it won't have the courage to get into a fight with Gaza children and its defenseless people next time. We are ready to sacrifice our lives for the sake of Islam and Quran.
Look at these people. They have taken to the streets and are supporting the ruling system, although they are under so much economic and psychological pressure. The psychological pressure is even more than the economic pressure. But despite all of that, they stayed their ground and showed up, especially the youth.
During the celebrations, paratroopers jumped from a plane while displaying a Palestinian flag as high-ranking Iranian officials attended the ceremony. On display were Iranian-made ballistic missiles, Shahed 136 drones and Simorgh satellite launchers. The West has accused Iran of supplying drones to Russia for its war in Ukraine and missiles to armed groups in the Middle East. The United States has also accused Tehran of actively facilitating attacks on American forces in the region and of backing attacks on Red Sea ships by Yemen's Houthi rebels. Crowds in the Azadi Square also held up portraits of the Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, founder of the Islamic Republic Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, and popular General Qasem Soleimani, who was killed in a US strike in January 2020. The celebrations in Tehran come ahead of March 1st legislative elections, the first national vote since the countrywide movement shook Iran after the death of Mahsa Amini. The 1979 Islamic Revolution in Iran overthrew the US-backed Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. In January 1979, the terminally and secretly ill Shah fled the country, which paved the way for the return of Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini from exile.
And in Indonesia, the Southeast Asian nation is gearing up for Election Day. More than 200 million voters will pick their new leader on the 14th of February. Indonesia holds the world's largest single-day elections. From dancing on TikTok to Korean pop culture, candidates have tried their best to woo young voters. 3 contestants are neck and neck for the top spot, and a cat-loving candidate is gaining popularity. Who will win the election, and what does this mean for the democracy in Southeast Asia? Our next report tells more.
For most of the world, the 14th of February will be celebrated as Valentine's Day, a day to celebrate with your loved ones. But for Indonesia, the 14th of February has a different significance, a political one. That's because the Southeast Asian nation will vote to elect their next leader. It will be the world's largest single-day election. President Joko Widodo will step down after completing his second term. So, who will be next in line? Here's a look at the candidates. The oldest and most popular candidate is Prabowo Subianto. He's Indonesia's current defense minister and a close ally of President Widodo. In fact, Subianto's vice presidential candidate is 36-year-old Gibran Rakabuming Raka, who happens to be the oldest son of President Widodo. Young Indonesian voters have expressed their concern about nepotism and patronage in politics. But Subianto isn't worried. He's riding on the popularity of the current president.
Prabowo Gibran and the Indonesia Maju coalition are fighting to eliminate poverty in the Republic of Indonesia, to bring prosperity to all Indonesians. We will continue what the previous presidents have built.
Despite years of political heft, Subianto has not managed to gain popularity among young voters, which is a forte of the next candidate. Anies Baswedan is a former academic, and he has crafted a niche following among the young generation. It all started when Baswedan made his presence online. Live streams, TikTok trends, and dancing to Korean pop music became his campaigning masterpiece, and the crowds loved it.
It all started from a TikTok live that Anies did one day. Anies went live after an event and it happened to be inside a car. Most K-pop idols, after performing in music shows like the K-pop show Music Bank, they do similar live streams in that sort of format.
From souvenirs to merchandise, Baswedan has truly captured the market. His face can be seen everywhere, and he will be the toughest candidate to beat. Then there's Ganjar Pranowo. Pranowo doesn't have a lot of experience with economic and foreign policies. However, he did make global headlines for refusing to host the Israeli team at the FIFA Under-19 Football World Cup last year. Because of Pranowo's stance, Indonesia were dropped as World Cup hosts, and he lost popularity among football fans. But he became a poster boy for hardline Islamists. Apart from the 3 presidential candidates, one contestant is winning hearts. Francine Wijojo and her cat have become fan favorites. The furry pet is seen at all the rallies and political functions. And animal lovers can't stop going gaga over Wijojo.
I'm happy. I appreciate and support if there are candidates who want to help the animals and change the regulations that we think are still not worthy.
The world's largest single-day election is around the corner. Over 205 million voters will participate. People under the age of 40 make up a majority of the voters. 575 parliamentary seats are up for grabs. The polling will happen using ballot papers. There are over 800,000 polling booths. Over 7 million electoral workers will ensure that voting ends on the same day. It will truly be a grand spectacle of democracy.
And finally, they say what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. But the glitzy city made an exception. The gambling mecca played host to the annual Super Bowl. And while the game started with a whimper, it certainly ended with a bang. The Kansas City Chiefs beat the San Francisco 49ers in overtime. But for all you Swifties out there, it was the singer herself, global pop star Taylor Swift, who stole the show. Celebrating with love interest Kansas City tight end Travis Kelce caught everyone's attention. But for the annual star-studded event, Taylor Swift certainly was not alone. Singer Usher headlined the halftime show with a total of 13 artists dazzling the Las Vegas crowd. From the flyover by the U.S. Air Force's Thunderbirds to the confetti shower at the end, we leave you with images from the truly majestic Super Bowl. That's our show for today. I'm Eric Ham. Thank you so much for watching. From impeachments to inaugurations, if it's a political story, we are on the scene. The race for the White House is heating up.
We're beating Biden.
How dare he say that?
If it's breaking news, we're live with the latest coverage. From the White House, the State Department, and Capitol Hill, we know the issues, but above all, we know the players to bring you the latest in-depth analysis on all the key stories that we're covering. I'm Eric Ham. Join me from Washington here on Firstpost America.